Hello fellow sim racers and welcome to episode 4 of Talking Sims. Today I'm joined by Zach Hodgson, whose company Turn Racing makes some of the nicest replica racing car steering wheels that I've ever seen. We're going to be talking about his process for producing high-end sim racing gear and hopefully finding out a little bit about what it's like to be a bespoke equipment manufacturer for the sim racing market. Hey Zach, how you doing?
Doing good, thank you. How are you?
Cool, man. Great, man. Thank you for joining me. So I guess, first of all, as a bit of an introduction to some of the viewers who may not know Turn Racing, maybe you can introduce the company and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, well, a lot of people think that Turn Racing is a big company, and I'm really just a one-man shop, and so I literally live above my shop in a detached shed, and it's kind of just was a hobby that I continued to pursue and spiraled out of control. So
there's something about sim racers and sheds that seem sort of magnetically drawn to each other. Either garages. I think we're not allowed in the house, are we? I think that's the key thing.
You know, I think rather than having like a '67 Chevy in the garage and working on that, now people would do it. And it's like their hobby is working on their sim rig. You know.
Yeah, one way or another, your hobbies will find a way of turning you upside down and shaking you till all the money falls out.
Yeah, exactly.
So, let's talk about the wheels a bit. They've got some pretty impressive specs, and evidently they look really fantastic. They're quite a long way from mass market products that most of us are familiar with. So, was the goal, I guess, to create products with as few compromises as possible?
Yeah, I started out in 2016. So I was on a team. I was, taking it pretty serious, trying to be competitive, and I really kind of hit like a plateau, like competitively, and I kind of started finding other interests too. And I was driving the R8, and I wanted to build an R8 wheel, and so I literally took just a piece of sheet metal. I traced out the shape of it, and then I made the grips out of wood, and I sanded it out of wood. And I just posted it to the iRacing forums, and people were like, man, I would pay for that. And then I thought, gosh, you know what I could do is I could start making these and have that kind of fund me to getting like a better sim rig. And I was like, I could make probably 10 to 15,000 and have just a crazy sim rig. And so I was working full time, and I started to do all the research. I was working in a machine shop, so I come from like a machining background, and I started designing stuff, and I spent probably a good 6 months just designing, learning Fusion 360, and then I got like a little desktop CNC, and I kind of just made like a proof of concept. And so I don't come from like, I guess I kind of come from like trying to do it as a hobby. And then as I realized, like business wise, like I can't compete with Logitech. So you kind of have to, I thought of like the Tesla model because I'm a huge Elon Musk fan. And I was like, well, if I'm doing low volume, I have to try to hit the top of the market because people are willing to pay more at the top of the market. And so it kind of naturally actually flowed to trying to create as quality of a product as I could, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess not least of all, if you're a one-man band, you're never going to be able to, certainly at that scale, churn out the quantity you need to compete with a Logitech or a Thrustmaster anyway. So I guess it naturally follows. Before we get into the really detailed stuff, could you maybe tell us a little bit about your sim racing history? You sort of touched on it a bit there. What got you involved in the hobby, and maybe help the viewers understand how it all really escalated to the point where you're running a sim racing hardware business?
Yeah, for sure. It really started probably 2014, 2015. As a kid growing up, I was always into like Gran Turismo and, gaming and stuff. So, and even like hardwares, like I'd built my own computers. So that was all pretty natural to me. And then, kind of after graduating high school, I tried starting a different business, really didn't work out. And then tried going into sales and into day trading, and that didn't work out. And then I actually moved back to my hometown and just kind of found the hobby kind of just found me because I was, looking for something to do. And I just had, an old G27 and and I really started having fun with it, and I wanted to get better. And so I started buying, like Going Faster and reading books on it and studying it. And I realized how much I love the engineering and the technical aspect of it. And so that's kind of really just the natural flow from, doing it as a sim racing hobby, but then wanting to get into like the engineering and actually making things.
You mentioned Going Faster. That's the Ross Bentley book, isn't it?
Yeah.
I read it a few years ago. I noticed you had him on your podcast, which we'll get to later. I'm just sort of connecting dots as we go here. Sorry. Mm-hmm. Right. As somewhat of a maker myself, I really enjoyed the video you published a couple of weeks ago detailing the build of the Turn 488 wheel. And I'm going to put a link to that in the video description and hopefully up the top in YouTube, because it really does give a sense of the sort of production process and the quality and the lengths that you're going to create these wheels. And maybe we can include some visuals here as well. But for those that haven't seen it, can you sort of walk us through the production process of one of your wheels?
Yeah, and that's one thing I'm really happy to start sharing this stuff, because there's kind of two mindsets, especially when you're making things that you want to be sort of proprietary. And there's like trying to say that everything's a trade secret and keep it all secret so no one can copy you, or you can go the complete other way and give it all away. And I really feel that, especially coming more from a DIY end, that there's more value in just giving it away. And so that's what I want to continue to do, because there's a huge just community. And I think being a one-man shop, I think being able to build that community and grow inside that community, there's more value in kind of having that exchange versus trying to pretend to be like a premium brand and it's all smoke and mirrors, because it really isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, there's a limited amount of functionality on a sim racing wheel, particularly if you've not got a proprietary sort of communication system like someone like Thrustmaster has. So, a lot of the information for creating it, something like that, is already out there. So if you've already got the skills, then you're probably the sort of person that's going to have had a go at making one anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And then, I am doing different like production style things where I'm doing the molding for the grips. And so, rather than having it be 3D printed grips, it's, polyurethane rubber, which is the same, like, for example, like the 488 or the R8 wheel, they'll both use polyurethane rubber. And so, I mean, that's something that, a person could do if they really, really wanted to, but there's a lot of investment and time that goes into that. So
yeah, no, I've been there, so you certainly don't have to convince me of that one. So what are the sort of steps? Maybe just sort of walk us through, from talk about the sort of CNC work and the molding, the assembly, you do your own circuit boards and the electronic assembly and everything. So maybe if you can just sort of walk us through the separate areas a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So like for the 488 specifically, I will start out by CNCing the carbon fiber. It is a solid 1/4 inch carbon fiber plate. And, I don't have a big production machine. And so it's kind of been a process to learn how to, contain all the dust, to do all the tool changes and things like that. But that's kind of more out of the scope of this. And so then after I will CNC it, then I'll go and I will do like a router table on the outer edges, and that could technically be done in the CNC, but just again, since mine's kind of not really meant to be like super heavy duty, it's a lot easier just to do it on the router table. And then I'll go into casting the grips, and I cast the grips in polyurethane rubber, and then I'll put that into a pressure chamber. And then what the pressure chamber does is it will take all the bubbles and it'll just squish them down to minuscule size, so that you can't see them anymore. And from there, I have right now with the 48, it's kind of in limbo right now, and so I haven't been promoting it a ton, because right now I'm having like the rear enclosure is done in a separate shop. It's done by SLS 3D printing, selective laser sintering, and then they'll tumble it and dye it black. And so it's nice because I don't have to really do anything with that. But yeah, I'm working. Actually, I've been working with a composite design engineer, and I'm gonna eventually have that rear enclosure be complete pre-preg carbon fiber.
That's
which
very
is
cool.
the same. Yeah, and so that's the same that they're doing in the real car, which will be really cool. It will bring the cost up, but I think that I'm just gonna try to see if I can make this wheel as best as humanly possible, and some people might like that, and then I can have I can keep having like my R8 be more of the middle to high end versus right at the top of the market, I think. But yeah, I guess from there, what I'll do is I'll do all the electronics, and so I'm using just the Leo Bodner circuit boards, the controllers, and then I have an electrical engineer that I work with that helped me design the breakout board. So then all of the switches are tactile push button switches like in the real wheel, and so yeah, from there, I mean, it's really a pretty simple wheel when you watch the video. Once all of that is kind of done, you kind of assemble it all and it's ready to go. So
thank you for sharing that in detail. I hope some of the viewers appreciate some of the effort that goes into that kind of thing. I mentioned I have a sort of a bit of a background in making myself. I used to assemble guitar pedals and design circuits and do that kind of thing. So yeah, it really makes my little nerdy heart sing, some of that stuff. Anyway,
yeah, for sure.
So moving on. I have got a sense, I think I said to you before we started recording, that I've been aware of turn racing for a couple of years. I saw on Instagram when you posted the first pictures of the R8 wheel and thought, man, these are really, really cool. And you get a sense through everything you do, from all the way from like the conception, the design stage, the production, and like even the packaging of the wheels. There's a sort of slavish attention to detail. Do you think I'm fair in saying that?
Yeah, for sure. I've always been like a really entrepreneurial person. So, I really study like really great entrepreneurs, and, I really don't like him personally, but Jeff Bezos, he always talks about being consumer or, customer obsessed. And I've also been like a little bit of a like obsessed to detail myself, and everything I've done is completely self-taught, like from learning how to do CAD, learning how to do CAM, learning how to, take photos and photography, doing like Illustrator, Photoshop, Premiere, and, all these other things. The list kind of goes on. But I've always been, like kind of a obsessive personality, I guess, where, if I get into something, I will just do it all out and I don't quit. And I'll try to make it as best as I can, because I feel like I have like a pretty good eye for things, and like design and things like that, and even with like social media marketing, I started spending money. I spent almost $500 just on a class learning how to do advertising, and it's kind of the stuff that's behind the scenes that people don't really get to see or appreciate. But and even I've learned, like, trying to get on YouTube now, people definitely don't appreciate like the amount of effort that it does take to do like video production and stuff like that.
I don't know what you're talking about, man. It's a piece of cake, this.
So
so it's definitely I was going to say it's a labor of love, but it sounds like you're absolutely dedicated to it, like 100%. Do you find much time to sleep, or
they kind of say like, oh, it must be great to work for yourself, and I'll say, yeah, it's great, you get to choose which 80 hours per week you work. So I mean, it's nice now, and I'll usually sleep in till 9 a.m. but I'll work until 9 p.m. 7 days a week right now.
Yeah, I can very much feel that. Moving away from the wheels for a moment, you also run a podcast, which I must admit I'd sort of overlooked for a little bit. I think I saw one of the first episodes, the one with David Perel, and then sort of forgot about it for a little while. And if anyone else, any of the other viewers are in the same situation, I suggest you go and give the Turn podcast a subscribe, because the guests you've had on your show, there's some pretty big names. A lot of GT drivers. Raffaele Marciello was on, David Perel, James Pull, Ross Bentley, who we mentioned earlier, like really well-known driver coach. Sold a lot of books on the subject, certainly to me at least. So,
Me too.
Yeah, it's a good crowd. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about the podcast, how it got started, and I guess what it's all about?
Yeah, for sure. It really kind of became part of like this idea of wanting to expand just the brand into being, a huge community. And I felt like with the podcast, there was an opportunity to share the stories of a lot of these racing drivers and people that are in the industry that don't get shared. Because, if when you watch, like say the Spot 24, the Le Mans, like I just think of how many stories there are in that don't get to the broadcast. And I wish, like, I want to like expand on that. And so that's kind of the idea, is where I want to, get people that are in the industry that are doing it professionally, or, kind of up and comers, and just learn their story. I mean, when you look at someone like David Perel, like the amount of effort that he's put into his career, like it's just unbelievable. And I was so thankful that, he was willing to come on my podcast and be my first guest and kind of share his story a little bit. And I wish I would have done a better job, and I'm going to have him on again, because like the amount of that he has sacrificed just to be a racing driver, a silver ranked professional driver right now, like it's crazy. He came from South Africa. He was a business owner with his brother. He had to sell his car. He broke up with his like long-term girlfriend. He had to obviously move to the UK, and like he's sacrificed pretty much everything. And people don't, I guess, appreciate that. I mean, there are some people that get, really lucky, and there's some people that, pretty much give everything. And so I think it's worth trying to share those stories.
Grids where there's a big so I guess conflict almost between people that are doing it the way David Perel has, and he's entirely self-financed, and a lot of the rest of the grid in say the Blancpain GT series is very wealthy business owners and the landed gentry. There's a few people with blood bluer than than the ocean in there.
Yeah.
So David's told his story a few times. It's always he's an incredibly inspiring person to talk to. I think that's it's great. And as I said to the viewers, where I assume that's on pretty much every podcast platform you can think of.
My podcast?
Yeah, your podcast. Sorry,
yeah. Yeah, it's on everything. It's on Stitcher, Google, Apple, and then on my YouTube channel.
Yes, it is. Cool. Yeah, sorry, I'd already forgotten about that. I've got a little note to mention that, and I've already failed. And on that note,
okay.
So I like to make sure one of the later questions I ask in these interviews is sort of talk about plans for the future, because it means we end on a positive note. And so I guess what's in store for Turn Racing for the rest of 2019 and for 2020?
Yeah, for sure. I got to be honest. I was actually just saying to my dad last night, like, this is my second full year in business, and I really couldn't have asked for a better year. And it was back in April that I quit my job. I actually had gotten what was basically like a dream job as a designer for a big company in town. Like, it was a really good job, especially not having a degree. I decided, it was also the same month that I had my first, I think, $10,000 in sales. So, I mean, that's not profit, obviously. But I told myself, I was like, you know what? Sorry, guys, but I gotta give it a try. I have to try it. Otherwise, I'll regret it. And if I can't come back, that's okay. I can always, move on and find something else. But yeah, so being able to do this full time is, it's kind of a dream of mine. And I would say for 2020, I would even be happy with having almost the same, like sales rise, because I'm pretty well at capacity, but just streamlining my processes, making everything just better yet. And then from there, really just like I've kind of talked before, building out the community. And so I'm doing a couple different things to do that. Like, especially like there's of course my social media platforms like with Facebook and Instagram, but then I really want to, start streaming and grow the podcast. And then I'm also working on having like an esports team. And so, yeah, I think just kind of building the brand out and being like not trying to be everywhere all at once, but just really being a part of what is this huge growing community. So
yeah, interesting you mentioned the esports team. That's something that having spent a lot of time around some of the bigger manufacturers, the more mass market ones, they're all desperately clamoring to get into at the moment, as they're sort of being a bit reactive to, I guess, the SimRacing Esports thing. Sort of, it hasn't really come out of the blue, but in the last 18 months, it's gotten massive. So it's good to see. And I hope you don't take this the wrong way. It's good to see smaller, more sort of bespoke manufacturers getting in on the game as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely an opportunity, because like even with talking with Rafael Markele, when I asked him like, what advice would you give to someone that wants to be a racing driver, he laughed, said, don't do it. Because just the logistics, it's unbelievable. I mean, if you want to do it for a year, I mean, it can be upwards of $250,000 just to do a GT3 car. And you can do this competitively for, pennies on the dollar. And
well, yeah, I mean, you look at all the fast guys still running like G27s with the force feedback turned off,
Yeah, and that's one thing that's, I kind of usually say that hardware really it isn't advantageous, but when they pretty much turn the force feedback off, it's a little gimmicky. But I mean, at the same time, it's almost as level as a playing field as you could have, like, with like the W series, they're trying to make it, like a level playing field. But I think sim racing honestly is the best level playing field there is.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of circle back to Raffaele, we had him compete in one of the races in the SRO Esport GT series when we were in Port Ricard. He just sort of turned up at the Esport Park and sort of volunteered himself to enter the amateur competition, which is hilarious given that he's
crazy
last year's champion. But what was really great about that, and I haven't had much chance to talk about it on the channel, so this is a great opportunity, is that it only took him a few laps to get onto the pace. And he was in the rigs we had there, which is just, it was a Thrustmaster, I think the TSPC, and the T3PA pedals, which I love Thrustmaster, but they don't feel anything like a road car, let alone a GT3 car. It's such a big difference. So being able to find braking limits, and particularly learning to trail brake and things like that in such a short space of time, the crossover between sim racing and real world racing is obviously they're getting much closer together. Which is, I guess, why every manufacturer under the sun is getting involved. I thought it was really interesting that when BMW announced they were leaving the WEC a couple of months ago, they said, oh, no, well, we're going to go and concentrate on Formula E, obviously, because, that's the future. That's where we're going to sell cars, but also esports. When you're telling the ACO and the FIA, it's like, sorry, your product isn't good enough, but we're going to go and hop on Gran Turismo or iRacing or whatever, then that's a pretty big sign. Well, I mean... Sorry, go on.
When you look at... when you talk about like how competitive the series are, really the value comes from how many people are watching it, right, with anything. And when you have something like esports that's coming up and the cost is so much lower and there's a lot of eyes that are starting to flock to it, it's hard to justify spending $100 million a year on a whatever it is, 50 million, whatever it is. I'm not sure. I mean, for a WC
GTE program, God knows what the budgets aren't really disclosed, but I mean, they're essentially prototypes masquerading as tin tops, aren't they? So
it's a lot.
Yeah, it's certainly more than getting involved in the iRacing championship or whatever.
Yeah, and that's why I think esports, it's completely underpriced. Everything across the board is underpriced.
Yeah, it's interesting. Audiences do seem to be growing slowly, but for me, I think where audiences need to come from for SimRacing Esports, and I apologise that we've gone a bit off topic here, but this is something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. I don't think sim racers are the target audience. At the moment, audiences are made up of people like you and me and everyone listening that sort of have a vague interest, but, you know, we're doing it. It's in the same way that you know, the Blancpain GT series isn't watched by other GT3 drivers. So it'll be interesting to see how SimRacing Esports are pushed out to a wider public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I know that there's like F1, they're trying to kind of make like a stage and a big production. And, you know, I don't know what the best way to go is. I think it'll be kind of naturally the best is going to rise to the top. But yeah, I think it's going to come down to who is doing the best storytelling, and that's what it kind of circles back to. Is, you know, what makes it? Yeah, how can you make it an interesting story, and that's, I think that's it. Everything revolves around that.
Yeah, and I honestly think that's where a lot of it is falling down. And I very much include the series that I'm involved in the production of. Is the thing I keep coming back and saying to the other partners involved is we need to do a better job of telling the story. Of people don't know who these drivers are a lot of the time. People don't know where they come from. And yeah, they might have heard of the team because it's Team Thrustmaster or Team Jean Alesi, and, you know, or Team Red Bull. There are names they recognise, but, you know, that's not enough to hang the whole thing on. So we need heroes, and they're starting to do that quite well in the F1 esports. But I think most of the stuff below that is still failing a bit, unless you've got a Max Verstappen or a Lando Norris turning up in your event.
That helps.
It certainly does.
For sure.
Before, I mean, I could sit and talk about the ins and outs of the business side of esports all day, but I've actually got someone else coming on next week or the week after to talk about that, so I don't want to completely sort of ruin that one. So why don't you tell us where people can find Turn Racing on the internet and on social media and everything else before I forget that all important
yeah, for sure. I'm probably most active right now on Instagram, and it's at Turn Racing. And then I'm really trying to, in the next year, ramp up my YouTube channel. And so it's just Turn Racing on YouTube. And yeah, those are the main two things that I really would like to grow. And that's probably the best way to interact with me, other than through my website and my email. So
well, that's pretty much got to through all the questions I had for you, man. Thank you so much for joining me. It was a real pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
So guys, thank you for sticking around until the end. As I mentioned in the last episode with Jimmy, this is now going out on various podcast apps and platforms, so wherever you normally find podcasts, you should be able to find this if you want to listen to it on your commute or whatever. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, it would be great if you could hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you can see more content like this in the future. So all that's left to say is goodbye, thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.